Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Street of Silence. My name is Mark, and I'll be your host today. Our channel explores the unknown and looks at a variety of unexplained topics such as UFOs, ghosts, cryptids, and other mysterious phenomena. In this episode, I want to discuss the alien abduction of Linda Napolitano. What makes this story truly unique is the number of independent eyewitnesses who saw the event and could corroborate her story. This case has been come to be known as the Brooklyn Bridge Incident. Linda Napolitano was a young woman in her 20s that lived in a high-rise apartment in New York. In April 1989, Napolitano was reading famed ufologist Budd Hopkins' book, Intruders, and remembered that 13 years ago, she had detected a bump next to her nose. She visited a doctor who stated she must have had nasal surgery, but Linda never had nasal surgery. She confirmed that she never had it with her mother as well. Later that year, in late November, early December, Napolitano contacted Budd Hopkins and said she had been abducted. The two began multiple hypnosis sessions, in which the events of that night would be remembered as follows. Napolitano said at 3:15 a.m. she woke up paralyzed and saw three non-human figures. They were gray and had big heads. They were floating in her bedroom. She tried to reach out and call her husband, but the beings told her to stay quiet. Next, a blue beam hit her and began pulling her through her apartment's window on the 12th floor. Linda lived in Manhattan. Linda said that her and the three other aliens levitated inside the beam until they reached a larger UFO that opened like a clam. Once inside the spaceship, Linda says she saw benches and went down a hallway where the doors slid open. She noticed a table, and she hoped that she did not get put on the table. Unfortunately, the aliens placed her on the table, and she began screaming as one of the aliens began muttering gibberish, trying to get her to be quiet. The alien eventually put its hand over her mouth so she couldn't scream. Medical procedures would ensue, and Linda states that they were so painful she passed out. She recalls them putting something in her nasal cavity, and interestingly, later a doctor would find an unknown device inside her nose. Linda didn't recall much else from the abduction at that point, but remembers waking up in her bed again around 3 hours later. And again, what makes this case so compelling is the number of independent witnesses. In 1991, two security guards named Richard and Dan sent a letter to famed ufologist Budd Hopkins and stated that there was an oval-shaped object hovering above the apartment building 2 or 3 blocks away. They weren't sure where it came from as it came so fast. The lights on the UFO turned from bright reddish to a white bluish from the bottom. Green lights rotated around the bottom. A woman wearing a white gown floated out of her window in the fetal position and then hovered midair in a beam of light. Dan and Richard stated they saw three of the ugliest creatures that they'd ever seen. Their heads were out of proportion, very large, with no hair. Dan and Richard attempted to get out of their car, but couldn't. Once Linda went in the spacecraft, the ship turned orange and speeded away. After receiving this letter, Hopkins finally met with the men and learned they were protecting an important political figure. This political figure also witnessed the incident, but he couldn't get a specific name of who it was. This is one of the reasons it took so long for them to reach out. They decided to reach out to Hopkins because of guilt. Later in 1991, Hopkins received another letter from a woman named Janet Kimball. She also said she had witnessed the event. She stated at 3 a.m. that morning she was driving over the Brooklyn Bridge when suddenly all the car lights and engines shut off. Street lights went out as well. Drivers then exited the car to see what was happening and saw the woman floating above her apartment, about 12 stories, and then going into a UFO. Later, a third man approached Hopkins stating he had witnessed the events, but he could not publicly come forward for fear of repercussions. It is believed that this was Javier Perez de Cuellar, the Secretary General of the United Nations, and this is the man that Richard and Dan were protecting that night. Further evidence supporting the story includes a metallic object that was discovered inside Linda's nose during a routine exam. It is believed that this was some sort of alien implant. Several weeks after this was found, Linda had a serious nosebleed that occurred during the night. An X-ray would soon reveal that a metallic object was no longer present, but the X-ray also showed a conspicuous ridge of built-up cartilage where it's believed to have once been. Hopkins suspected that the aliens had placed the object in her nose, and when they realized Linda might try to have it removed, the aliens extracted it for fear that we might get a hold of their technology. With almost every UFO and alien story, questions begin to arise from skeptics. For example, many question whether Dan and Richard really exist. Also, they ponder why it took them so long to contact Hopkins. One other thing that skeptics point out is that Napolitano was an avid UFO fan before her abduction. She attended talks by Hopkins and read books on aliens, such as Intruders. It is generally agreed upon that if this event had happened today over the Brooklyn Bridge, evidence would almost certainly exist. In the age where almost everyone has a cell phone camera, with dozens of witnesses, someone would have likely snapped a picture. In addition, many buildings have multiple cameras, as well as various tracking devices by the city. It could be possible that the aliens could cripple the electronic systems, but the sheer number of independent witnesses corroborating the same story would be solid proof. Thank you for your time and listening. If you enjoyed this content, please consider subscribing to the channel, and we always welcome feedback and new story suggestions.